Okay, we're going to do a sampling of questions from the homework from 1.1 in the Algebra 2 Honors, Graphing Parabolas. I think the first one that was asked was 15, so I'm going to start with 15. We want to do, this is negative x squared plus 0x plus 2. And I know that the axis of symmetry and the vertex is negative b over 2a. Negative b over 2a. This is ax squared plus bx plus c. So the b is a 0, the a is a negative 1. 0 over almost anything is 0. So x equals 0 is my vertex. When I make a table, an xy table, I'm going to use 0. Then I'm going to use one bigger and one smaller because I'm going to ask for 3 points on your graphs. If you put in a 0, what would we get out? Well, you have negative x squared plus 2. If I put in a 0, what would y equal? Okay, y would equal 2. So it's going to go through this point 0, 2. That happens to be the vertex, so I'm labeling it with a V. Because A is negative, does that mean it'll open up or down? Downward. And if you know that this is a 1, you might know to go down 1 and over 1, down 1 and over 1. So the vertex is at 0, 2. Let me get rid of some of this down here. If you put in a 1, what do you get? Suppose you put in a 1 or a negative 1. You get negative 1 plus 2, which is 1. So you have 1, 1, and negative 1, 1. And again, the parabola opens downward. Okay, we're going to move on to 17. Again, this is y equals 3/4 x squared. I see a 0x because there's nothing there. That means that the b is a 0. So when you do negative b over 2a to find the vertex, excuse me, you're going to replace 0 with the b with a 0 and the a with a 3/4. Again, 0 divided by almost anything is 0. So if I put 0 in, what would I get out for a y value? That's going to be my vertex. So if I have 3/4 x squared minus 5 and I put in a 0, wouldn't that give me a negative 5? Is it a negative 3/4 on the original question? I think it's a positive 3/4. And anyway, we get 0, negative 5. Which way is this thing going to open if a is positive? It's going to open upward. So I'll go 0, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right down here is 0, negative 5. That's going to be your vertex. I'm trying to show you some shortcuts, take it or leave it. That number right here is 3/4. You'd go up 3/4 and over 1, up 3/4 and over 1, and you would have your graph. But that doesn't really fulfill what I want as far as the 3 points. So I'm going to ask you to put in a number like 1 and negative 1. If I put in a 1, what is 3/4? What's 1 squared? 1. You have to do the exponent first. And 1 times 3/4 is 3/4. 3/4, 5 could be called 20 over 4, right? You'd have to make it into a common denominator. 3/4 minus 24 is negative 17/4. And because it's symmetric, I think you'd have the same value here. So right there is 1 negative 17/4. This point is -1, -17 fourths. I will ask for the vertex and two symmetric points on the graph. Okay, this is number 23. Again, we want to use -b over 2a to find the vertex. So what is the b? B is 8. What is the a? -4. So you get -8 over -8. X equals 1 is where the vertex should occur. So when I put in a 1, what do I get out? -4 plus 8 plus 2. If you put in a 1, you just get basically your coefficients. 10 minus 4, I think that would be a 1/6. 1 comma 6. Now, I need a number bigger. It's going to open which way, up or down? This is going to open down. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's up here at 1/6, and it's opening down. Do you see this number right here? I'm trying to give you shortcuts. You can take it or leave it. You go down how far? 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. So I think that might even give you your points if you're very careful. And I got those without even plugging in and doing arithmetic. Now let's plug it in and do the arithmetic. Y equals -4 something squared plus 8 something plus 2. What's 1 bigger than 2? Well, 1 bigger than 1. 2. What's 1 smaller than 1? And if you do this right, these two should have the same y values. What do you get if you put in a 0? You get out a 2. Is that what I have? What happens if you put in a 2? 4 times that's -16 plus 16 plus 2. I think you also get a 2, right? So you can either take the shortcut or not. You can always plug and chug, put the numbers in, and get a y value out. I believe they might also ask for something called the axis of symmetry. That's always what you get when you do -b over 2a. So the axis of symmetry is the line that you'd fold it on. Let me go back. The line that you would fold it on if they matched up. This right here is x equals 1. It's not part of the parabola, but it's where it is symmetric about. 25, we're going to again do x equals -b over 2a. -b over 2a. b in this case is, again, ax squared plus bx plus c. b is a -2. A is a -1. So you get 2 over -2, I think. That makes it into a -1 for your vertex. So if I plug -1 in, I'm going to get a y value out. So I have y equals -x squared minus 2x minus 1. I'm going to replace the x with a -1. What happens? You have -1 squared, which is 1, so that's -1, plus 2 minus 1. That's 2 and -2. I think that would make your vertex at -1, 0. So I'm going to make my graph. Going to make it, and I'm going to put the vertex at -1, 0. Does this open up or down? So it might be better if I wrote the vertex above it. Now, Allie, I just want you to, do you agree it opens down?
Yes.
And this number here is a 1?
Yes.
So if I went down 1 and over 1, I'd be at this point. Down 1 and over 1, I think I'd be at this point, and it would be a parabola opening downward. Now let's verify. Let's put in a 0, see if we do get this number. If you put in a 0, you get 0 plus 0 minus 1. So I think we'd get a negative. We do get that value, right? And what's another point? If you put in something smaller like a -2, you also should get -1. Again, these should be the same because they're what are called symmetric points. They're equal distance away from the vertex on the x-axis. Good. The axis is symmetry. I really don't want just the number. You got to say x equals, but you're right. The axis of symmetry is x equals -1. That's where you'd fold it. Okay, how about 29? Is that next? Let's look at 29. Again, we're going to use -b over 2a. Negative, I'll plug in. 2, I'll plug in. So, what is the b? b is 2. What is a? -3/5. So you have -2 divided by top times top, bottom times bottom. How do you divide by, well, first off, a negative divided by a negative is going to yield a positive, right? So I already know it's going to give me a positive, so I probably won't mess with the signs. How do I divide by 6/5? You multiply by its reciprocal, which would be 5/6. Top times top, bottom times bottom, half the top, half the bottom, and that's where your axis of symmetry or your vertex is going to be. Now this is where you're going to have a little challenge, because now you're going to have to plug in a fraction, 5/3. So bear with me as I set this up. I need to replace all of these x's with 5/3. 5/3. Does anybody know how to square a fraction? You square the top and you square the bottom. Does 5 go into 25? 5 times. Does 3 go into 9? 3 times. So that would simplify to -5/3 plus 10/3, and plus 2 could be called 6/3. How do you get 6/3? You multiply it by a fancy form of 1. So 16/3 minus 5/3 makes this 11/3. So your vertex is going to be at this strange fraction. It's going to be opening downward because the a is negative. Hold on a second, I'm going to set up the graph. So 5/3 would be at 1 2/3. That's 1 2/3. What is 11/3? So I go to 1 2/3 is about here. And then I go 11/3, which is 3 2/3. Is that right? 3 2/3. And I know it opens downward. So I have my vertex is at 5/3, 11/3. If you'd like to do the easy way, plug in 0. Because when you plug in 0, some nice things happen. Let me get rid of this. If you replace in a 0, you get 0 plus 0 plus 2. So would 0, 2 work? Yes? So I go to 0, 2. If I went to 5/3 and then I went another 5/3, please watch. I go 0 to 5/3, then another 5/3. Would that make that 10/3? So I think I just extrapolated another point. without plugging it in. Feel free to plug numbers in. They'll always work if you're careful. Graphing calculators can really help on these too, especially if you know how to use them efficiently. Okay, let's take a look at 31. Again, I want to use negative b over 2a, or x equals negative b over 2a. Negative b, 2a, b in this case is negative 4, a appears to be 8/5. So that makes it a 4 over, I think, top times top, bottom times bottom, 16/5. How do you divide by 16/5? You multiply by its reciprocal, 5/16. Top times top, bottom times bottom. 4 times 5 is 20, 4 times 4 is 16. So I get x equals 5/4. So when I make my XY table, the vertex is going to be at 5/4. Now when I put 5/4 in, that will give me the y value. Okay, I'm going to put in 5/4 and 5/4. To square a fraction means you square the top. That would be 25, square the bottom, 16. 5 goes into 25 5 times, 8 goes into 16 2 times, so you end up with 5 over 2. These 4's cancel, so that's minus 5 plus 5. That'll cancel, leaving you just 5/2. So I have 5/4, 5/2. 5/4 is between what integers? 5/4 is 1 and 1/4. Then I'd go to 2 and 1/2. 5/2 is 2 and 1/2. If you put in a 0, what would you get out? You need to be able to put zeros in because it's really pretty easy. You just end up with the last constant, right? You get 0 minus 0 plus 5. So if you put in a 0, I think you get a 5, right? So I'm going to go 0, 5. I know it opens upward. Watch this very carefully, please. You went over to 5/4. So if I go over 5/4 and then I go another 5/4, where would I be? 5/4 and 5/4 is 10/4 or 5/2. And what's the y value? 5. So I have 5/2, 5. Again, these should match up, and the parabola opens upward. Some of these are harder than others, but I hope this helps with 1.1 graphing of parabolas.